want to move on to turn the light back on so we don't get an injury.
Yeah.
Oh, this is nice.
Okay, so for starters, I'll just introduce myself. My name's Amick. I was born and raised in Frankton, still live in Frankton. And for those that don't know, kind of why I'm doing this, the Frankton Volunteer Fire Department originally started officially, it was incorporated in 1950, but as of I believe it was 2014, was disbanded and no longer exists. So fire protection in the town is provided by Pike Creek Fire Department, and the vast majority of the members and the equipment actually ended up moving to Lafayette Township Fire Department, which still covers Lafayette Township and Jackson Township, Purposeville. But the town protection is provided by Pike Creek Fire Department. So, in a sad way, the fire department is kind of being lost to history. Just with time, it's been over 10 years already since it's been gone. So, it's pretty important to me to make sure people know the history of it. I've done a lot of research. I've been given a lot of artifacts and materials and photos and newspaper articles and everything over the years, and just done a lot of research. So I just want to kind of thank Loretta and Jesse and the History Club in general for allowing me to do this. It kind of got me motivated to put something together with all the newspaper clippings and photos that I have that is kind of a more cumulative history, and I ended up learning a lot through the course of doing this slideshow and this research. So we'll go ahead and get started. So earliest known evidence of a fire department in Frankton was actually as early as 1925. There was a large garage in the middle of town, from the sounds of it. It caught on fire and burned, I believe it was 9 automobiles. Loss was upwards of $17,000, which obviously with inflation would be a pretty significant fire. And something to note about these articles, one of these is actually, this one's actually from the Indianapolis newspaper, which is actually pretty interesting that it made it that far, especially that long ago. So it had to have been a significant fire, at least for the town's history. But something of interest that's in this article is here where it says the Frankton Fire Department used its new pumper for the first time. So the reason that's significant is because at the time, Frankton didn't have a, what I guess you would call a bona fide fire department. What they had at the time was called Pike Creek Township Fire Control. And it was actually based out of the garage across from Versatile Metalworks. I'm not sure which garage that used to be. I'm not old enough to know, but it had 3 bays. The far left bay was actually used to house a fire truck. And from what I can tell, that's where this comes from. That's why I said likely Pike Creek Township, because at the time the town did not have its own fire apparatus or fire department. So prior to finding these articles, the earliest known evidence we had of the fire department was really just the 1940s. So this was actually a pretty interesting find that let us know that there was some sort of organization prior to the 1940s. So the next slide, this is the first mention of a Frankton Fire Brigade, where it actually is talking about 2 separate departments. So back in mid-century, very common in central rural Indiana. A lot of times fire protection would be divided into 2 categories. It would be divided into town protection and township protection, where funding for the township department was provided by the township and the trustees, and the town had its own fire department. Well, the way this would work is the town fire department would be paged out to go to calls within the town and strictly within the town limits, and then the township department would be dispatched to handle anything outside of town limits. However, they were both based in the town just because of being centralized to all the citizens in the coverage area. So these articles are from 1934, and it was a large fire on Sigler Street. It says it swept half a block and took out multiple houses. It was near the high school. It doesn't give an exact approximation of where it was at. It just says it was near the high school in Sigler. And it was discovered at the Friend Hardware store. It started in the upper part of the building and then just spread from there. So at this time, there is the first mention of an actual fire chief, G.L. Potter. I'm not sure who that is. His name does come up a few times in some of the articles I found. But from what I could tell, he was the first, at least, written chief of Frankton's own fire department. Then it also mentions a Chief Rosenberger of the Pike Creek Township Fire Department for the fire protection. And it's just interesting because they called it a brigade back then, I guess just because it wasn't totally organized yet. It wasn't incorporated. And at this time, from my understanding, both fire departments only had one truck. Pike Creek would have had their old Chevy pumper, which I do have a picture of in this slideshow. And Frankton at the time had from what I could tell, the earliest known apparatus was a old Mack milk tanker that had been converted to fire department use. So, this is still pre-1950, so this is 1949. This is getting into, getting towards incorporation, and really where things start to kind of pick up and organize for the fire department. So this kind of calls back to what I was talking about, where this article says that we have two fire trucks, one belonging to the community itself and the other to the township. The township truck makes runs within a 10-mile radius of the town, but the town truck never leaves Frankton, so that's an important thing to note. And it's housed at the Frankton Standard Garage, and the Pike Creek Township truck is housed at the Luther Neff Garage. So I guess that's the name of that garage over there. It'd be on Washington Street. So, something to note about this time period is a very familiar name starts to come up, Bill Spoo, Spoo Service Garage. So, Bill Spoo was Frankton Fire Chief for many years, throughout the late 1940s, 1950s from what we can tell. So, and the fire truck, for many years was housed at the town garage all the way at the north end of town back with the water department. And then towards the end of the 1940s, early 1950s, they actually began to house it in Bill Spoo's garage. It was a more centralized location, and Bill Spoo was the fire chief, so the idea was that he'd be there all day long at the service station. So if a call came in, he would have the truck ready, and as soon as guys showed up, they were out the door. So it really increased their response times and helped with just their organization. But something that's really neat to me about this period is that they talk about a telephone communication system, a notification system that notified the firefighters. So, and this is kind of a unique thing that I haven't really heard of any other department's history having this sort of communication system. So the way it worked was calls would come in to the switchboard operator at the little building over here behind the bank. Calls would come into the switchboard operator. They would direct it directly to Bill Spoo at the garage. Phone would ring at the garage, Bill would answer it, and then he would individually notify the firefighters. They were all sort of in their own little phone network where he could actually notify the firemen directly in the event of an emergency. Now, there was also a mention of a fire whistle at this point. I'm not entirely sure what they're referring to. At this point, it says it's down at the water plant, so that would have been where the fire truck was at the time, prior to it being at Bill Spoo's garage. I'm not sure if that is the siren that's currently up there right now, or if it was an earlier version. It may have been. And at this time, the department was still not incorporated. So then 1950 hits, which is probably the biggest year historically for the Frankton Fire Department. So incorporation occurs. And the reason we know this is because my dad was the fire chief from 2005 to 2011. And in that time, you know, just in hanging out at the fire station, we just started going through old paperwork, old documents. That's where I got this huge tote of historical pictures. And we found our original incorporation paperwork, which is very neat. It came from the state in 1950, recognizing Frankton Fire Department as an incorporated actual department. So it was kind of official at that point. And the big thing that happened, technically in 1951, was they got their first ever new fire apparatus. And this was a big deal because, like I said, everything past or prior to this point had been a repurposed truck or something of the sort. This was the first purpose-built fire truck they ever bought. It was
Is that
ordered.
the picture down at the bottom there?
Yes, that's the truck. And there's some later on in the slideshow
Okay.
also. And that picture is from the 1970s. So that truck was ordered brand new from Howe Fire Apparatus in Anderson. And the reason for the order of the truck was that Frankton actually had a fire at one point, and their fire truck was broken. So there was no, or there was a severe lack of coverage within the town. So what actually happened was they got together, went to Howe, and they actually ordered this truck. But at the same time, there's also an article that talks about Howe loaned the town a fire truck for the time being until this truck could be built, which is very neat. So the Howe Fire Apparatus was actually very large fire apparatus manufacturer based in Anderson. They started in Anderson in the early 1900s, and a lot of departments around here had Howe pumpers just like that. And that is actually the truck that I own currently. And it's in my personal collection with all my other fire department and, you know, international harvesting memorabilia. So
Does it still run in it?
yes,
Wow.
runs like top. It doesn't stop though, it needs brakes. So,
That could be a problem.
but
You should be.
yeah, runs, drives, lights, siren work, everything. It pumps water. Just needs some brake work. It's just hard to source parts for those trucks. And this is actually another interesting thing. This is the first mention of the actual phone number for the fire department. And it was Frankton 3456, so easy to dial. Of course, this was pre-911 with an actual dispatch center, centralized to, you know, the county. So this is an article from 1955 that was in the Herald Bulletin, or actually it wasn't called the Herald Bulletin then, I can't remember specifically what it was called, but there is a photo of the Pike Creek Township Fire Control. So that's the Lutheran F Garage over there on Washington. And that is the original fire truck that protected the town until Frankton got theirs.
Wow.
And then it talks about Bill Spoo again in this middle article. And at this time in 1955, this is wild, they had 21 members, which may not seem like a lot of people, but growing up in the department, 21 was pretty good. There were times that we had membership in the teens, which is scary because we had one of the largest protection districts in the state of Indiana by square mile. So things got a little tumultuous there, but I just think it's very impressive that at that early of incorporation and organization that they have 21 members. That's pretty significant. Sadly, these are the best scans I could get of these. I don't know if there's a better version possibly in the Anderson Library Archives because that's where these came from. But at this time, hands kind of changed. Bill Spoo's still chief, and that's the international owl pumper there. But at that time, Edward Whitten was the chief of the Pike Creek Fire Patrol. And those are still it was still handled the same where this truck responded to town incidents only, and that truck responded to township incidents and would also assist. They would assist each other back and forth, but typically Frankton's truck never left the town limits. And that's why at it was 75 years old, it only has 7,000 original miles. So,
Has Pike Creek always been located where Pike Creek is now in Elwood, or?
so Pike Creek moved to Red Corner, next to the Red Corner School,
Yeah.
in 1959.
Okay.
So they were shortly after our incorporation,
Okay.
they began theirs. And actually my grandpa, Bill Amick, was one of the founding members.
Mhm.
And yeah, they started out with just a block building and one truck, just kind of like Frankton did. And they've grown pretty well also.
Yeah.
These are some very neat photos that are the initial construction of the firehouse up on the point of, Plum and Lafayette Streets. So this is the initial digging of the foundation, and something pretty neat that stands out in these pictures to me is the movie screen that I've heard a lot about, because the fire station's built on a hill, as everyone knows. So I've heard multiple stories from people that said, hey, when I was a kid, my family used to go sit on that hill and watch movies on the projector.
I was one of them.
Yeah.
One of them. Several of us did.
Yeah. So there's, and it's pretty neat because you can still see, I know that black log home is still there, and I know that house is still there as well. So it's just pretty neat to see these older photos. And there's the couple more from the initial construction. And from my best estimates, these are from 1958, because this following article is from 1959, where it was nearing completion. And something interesting that I actually read in some of these initial articles, and I've got copies of them all. The initial location for the fire station was actually going to be directly behind, well, where we're standing, Sprague's Auto Body. It was going to be on the corner up here across from the bank, according to this article. But it ended up being moved to the point up there of Lafayette and Plum Streets, and it was for good reason. It was actually strategic in that trucks could pull out of the department and they could go one of 5 ways and pretty much evenly split the town. So it was actually a strategic location for the fire department to be built right where it's at, which is pretty neat that much thinking went into it. And at that time, because there was only one fire truck, it was actually used in tandem with the town. They would store their tractor and their backhoe in the garage at the same time. And at this time, Bill Spoo was still chief. So this is the first mention of an actual siren, a fire siren. And for those who weren't aware, there is, way up on a pole, right next to the fire station, there's a little red siren. And that siren dates back, as we can see, to the 50s at least. And it was used to notify the firemen of a fire. It was set off, and it just could be heard across town to notify them, hey, get up to the station, there's a fire or a call. And with the help of some folks in here, Loretta, Mr. Bashir, I actually was given the siren by the town. I've yet to remove it. I'm still waiting on some better weather to actually get up in the air and take it down. But that siren obviously dates back this far, and it was used up until roughly the 1990s as a fire siren, from what we could tell. And then it was actually inactive, it was broken. So at one point, the town actually removed it from its mount on the pole, and it was put in a scrap pile back behind the waterworks. And this would have been in the mid-2000s when my dad was chief. So Dad had heard about it being removed, knew it was a piece of department history dating back, this far, and went to pull it out of the scrap pile. So he actually ended up taking the siren. He had the motor rebuilt, rewound. It was completely rewired, and then he took the shroud of it, the bright red part, and he took it to Ron McCord of CNR Sandblasting, and Ron blasted it free of charge, just for my dad as a favor. Ron blasted it and painted it International Harvester Red, which I think is pretty fitting. But then it was put back into service, and a lot of people don't know, but actually for many years, in the early 2000s, that was the only tornado siren we had in town. The one out by the elementary school that's much, much louder wasn't installed until later. So there was actually a pretty significant gap where the town had no sort of outdoor warning for severe weather. That siren was also used for that. So that was why it meant a lot to me, because my dad went out of his way, money out of his own pocket, and the town did not, and the department did not pay for anything. Had that siren refurbished and put it back in service to be used again. So it meant a lot to me, so that's why I'm glad the town was able to come to an agreement that I can have it back so it can go into my collection with the rest of the things. So this was a fire in 1965. There were a few pretty significant fires in Frankton history. This was one of them. This was the Alexandria Molding Company. And at this time, Bill Spoo was still chief, and Marion Crawford was the assistant chief. So
Where was that located?
I'd have to actually read the article.
That's okay.
I know that it was used, I guess they molded, I'm not actually sure what they molded. It's just, it says it fed on chemicals and lumber. I just know it was a large building and a large fire, and it made the papers.
Where's the location?
I'm not sure on this one. This was actually the first I had heard of it.
I haven't never heard of it.
Yeah, I had never heard of this business. But
We'll have to research that.
yeah. But this is one of the larger fires that happened. And then this is where we're getting into the 1970s. So at this time, Marion Crawford became chief. And Marion was quite the character. I actually got to know him before he passed in the mid-2000s. He used to come up to the fire station, and he would just sit in the radio room, and he loved smoking pipe. And he had this, I remember so vividly as a kid, he had this Zippo lighter that he would light it, and the flame was about a foot tall on it. But he just loved to sit up there and pal around with the guys, talk about, the department, firefighting and everything. And I was lucky enough, before he passed, he actually gave me his chief helmet, which is in fantastic shape. So that's a part of my personal collection to display with everything else I've got.
Do you know where the design of those hats came from?
No.
The design of those hats came from the fishermen.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah.
If you think about it, that you see fishermen that have the thing down the back and all that to protect them from the rain. And
Huh.
I read that not too long ago.
That is interesting. This is actually where it starts to list out some firemen. Chuck Clark was a name that was on the department for many years. I know Carl Fry was another name that came up quite a bit. Walt Shively. What's that?
Yes, Cook.
I know there was. I have a picture in this stack of. I always thought it was funny because there's a picture of Carl Fry and Mr. Cook fighting a fire together, and if you read their jackets, it says Fry Cook, but It's just, it's interesting, but, it's just it's a really neat picture of them fighting the fire together, pulling a hose line.
Joe Smith, Joe Smith was one of the big fire department, on the fire department back then too.
Yeah,
And his son Ronnie and Bob
Yeah.
Crowell.
yep. Bob and George Crowell were, very big into it. George Crowell was actually the only surviving member, by the time we got the fire truck, the first fire truck. We got it, back up and running. Heritage Days 2005 was the sort of debut where we had it in the parade for the first time. And we've got some pictures with George Crowell with the truck that were very cool. So something interesting that happens in the 1960s, and I'm sure folks in here remember, they had one red truck, everything else was orange. And that started, best we could tell, in the late 60s. But everything ordered from roughly 1969 to 1995 was all orange. And there is an actual reason for it. So back in the day, you would go on a fire where, 5 or 6 departments would be called. And every truck that showed up looked the same. Because back then there wasn't a whole lot of variety. Vast majority of them actually looked very similar to our engine one, the Howe Thunder. Because a lot of people around here had trucks like that. Well, when you're on a scene like that, organization gets kind of difficult with that many trucks, not many people around. And if you're looking around and everything looks the same, it's kind of hard to distinguish who needs to go where.
Yeah.
So the county came up with an idea, kind of unanimously, all the departments in the 1970s, where they would start to differentiate their colors. So Frankton got orange, Lapel got a pale kind of lime green color, Richland got a lime green color, Pipe Creek stayed red, a lot of departments stayed red, but Chesterfield got yellow trucks, some departments had white trucks. It just made it easier to distinguish who was who on a fire scene. They tried to kind of split things up so they could actually, hey, we see an orange truck, we know that's Frankton, that sort of thing. So there was a reason for it, and every truck was painted Omaha orange. So just pretty neat. And those are some pictures, obviously in front of the high school in the 70s. And I've got a lot more like that. This was probably the single biggest fire in Frankton history, I would say, was Grain Elevator, because I'm sure a ton of people remember it. Obviously, it was far before my time, but I have quite a few articles mentioning this fire. And it's actually hard to distinguish in this picture, but this is looking roughly northeast. So Washington Street would be back here, because that's one of the silos that's still standing. But this was obviously a very large fire. It brought in a lot of manpower from the surrounding areas. And a lot of the old guys you would talk to in the department always talk about the grain elevator fire. The grain elevator and the sawmill fire were the two big ones they always talked about. So this is the oldest truck that I currently know exists, that dates back to the 40s. And it was that old Mack milk tanker that I talked about. It was purchased by a farmer outside of Elwood and was used as just a flatbed truck for many years. At some point it was sitting in a tree row, had a tree fall on it, sadly, but it is, it's still around. I mean, it's fallen apart. You won't sell it. I've tried to buy it. I need it like a hole in the head, but I still want it, but it does still exist, and I've confirmed that it is the same truck. The lettering on the doors is still faintly visible underneath his writing, and there's holes in the top of the cab that were filled with like vulcanized rubber from where the siren and the light were. So pretty neat.
Is it stored inside or just sitting out?
No, it's sitting behind his machine shed out north of Elwood.
It's outside?
Yep.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. Not much of the original truck left, sadly. I mean, he painted it red when he got it and scrapped the body off of it. So yeah, not much of the original truck is left, sadly, but it's still there. And there's another view of the truck, and you can just barely make out a B, an F, and a D right there. It's owned by Terry Eaton outside Elwood. So, I've stopped there probably 2 or 3 times, so I guess I'm due for my yearly visit to go see if he's changed his mind yet. So this is what we called Engine 1. It didn't really have a designation other than that. At one point, it was called Truck 5, based on the numbers on the dash inside the truck for the radio, but Engine 1 was the one we talked about that was the first new purpose-built apparatus that was ever ordered for the department. So this truck kind of has an interesting history outside of the department. It was delivered to Frankton in the 50s and served until the 1990s. It was, obviously maintained and kept up that whole time. As far as I know, it never spent a night outside. It's in immaculate shape for its age. But in the 90s, the town decided to get rid of a couple trucks, this being one of them. And thankfully, I'm thankful every day, a collector bought it. And the collector actually used to work at Powell Fire Apparatus in Anderson and was an Anderson fireman. So it made its furthest journey away from Frankton ever, and it made it about 5 miles east of State Road 9. That's all the further it's ever gone. So actually the furthest this truck has ever been from Frankton, to my knowledge, is the plant in Anderson. Actually it would have been on the south side of Anderson, near the racetrack. So that is the furthest this truck has been from Frankton, to my knowledge. Which again explains why it only has 7,000 miles on it. So the man that bought it had it stored in a barn for many years. And in 2005, when my dad took over the department, he sought out the truck. He wanted it because it was obviously a massive piece of department history. He knew the guy that had it, and there was a pretty tough negotiation trying to get the truck back. He did not want to let go of it. He was a pretty heavy collector, but a lot of his stuff was just kind of piled in barns. So it wasn't being appreciated and cherished like it should have been. So after a lot of negotiating, in July of 2005, it would have been 6 days after my 6th birthday, we went over to where it was stored, just east of State Road 9, and we got it back. So we purchased it for $3,500. My dad showed up cash in hand, and my grandpa put his arm in front of him and handed the guy the money. So my grandpa actually bought the truck for my dad and for the department. And that meant a lot to us, of course. And he made it clear from day one that that truck was to always stay in the family from that point forward. And he willed it to me, so I inherited it when he passed a couple years back. So there it is, all cleaned up. So that's in 2006. So I have hundreds of pictures of us kind of bringing it back to life. We spent a lot of time sandblasting and painting the wheels. We buffed the whole truck. Got a lot of the period correct equipment for it back on it, and just really shined it up. And it was in a lot of parades in town from 2005 to about 2014 was its last parade. So, but at this time, it still pumped water. And it runs great. It still runs great, but it's just a really neat old truck. I'm glad I've got it. It's, like I said, it's needing some work right now with the brakes and everything, and I've had some intentions to have it back in the Heritage Days Parade at least sometime in the next year or two, as well as a couple local fire truck shows that are going on. So yeah, that truck's very sentimental to us. I'm glad we've got it, and now I'm glad we've got the siren to go along with it, as well as everything else we've got. So, I think that's it for the presentation. But I've got a lot of photos and patches and things to pass around that people can look at. And then there are some photos in this tote that I'm going to donate to the History Club,
Wow,
just because I've got duplicates of them.
cool.
And I was also told that there are actually some old artifacts from the station in storage that I've got to go get. We've got a member plaque that had everyone's names engraved in it in the years they served. It stopped getting updated in, I think, the 1990s, but I'm going to work on getting that back, as well as some other, department photos of all the guys together and everything. So that being said, the presentation just kind of ends in the 70s, and the reason for that is nothing of note really happens in between the 1970s and about the early 2000s. Everything was pretty tame, pretty normal, and then things kind of got a little rocky around 2009, 2010, in that area. I'm sure a lot of you remember the "We Support Frankton Fire Department" yard signs. It seemed like there was one every other house in town. The department hit a pretty steep financial crisis, where we were very short on funding, had very outdated equipment. I know there were a lot of really long, sleepless nights for my dad and some of his guys that were applying for every state grant they could think of, federal grants, local grants, anything they could think of, just to get us back on our feet. Because at the time, things were starting to get pretty rocky, and there were pretty valid concerns of the fire department actually going out of business and not being able to provide fire protection to the citizens of Frankton. But luckily, thanks to the sacrifices of a lot of our guys and citizens, but honestly, primarily my parents, they were able to save the fire department. I can't even begin to tell you the sacrifices my family made to save the fire department. It put us in a tough spot financially. My parents put themselves through a pretty hard time.
That's what passion does.
Yeah,
You're very passionate about it.
they saved it, so we're really thankful for that, because I grew up in it and it meant a lot to me. And then it got to the point in about 2011, 2012 where my dad just couldn't do it anymore. It was just exhausting. He had given it everything he could, and he handed it off to the guys. There was some internal things going on that just kind of ruined it for everyone. And sadly, Dad kind of left, and they kind of floated for a few years, and then the town just chose not to renew the contract, and that was kind of the end of it. Like I said, everything just went to Lafayette Township, and Pipe Creek was awarded the contract, and that was basically the end of the Frankton Fire Department. So, sad to say it doesn't exist anymore. It is a shame, especially as important as it is to me, but that's why I'm trying to sort of save it.
Absolutely.
Because at the time, it was an extremely hot summer day, and I was about 7 years old, I think, and we were cleaning out the attic of the fire station, and someone found this tote, and it was covered in about 2 inches of dust, and pulled it out and said, "Hey, there's a bunch of old pictures in here." And we had some hanging up in the station on the walls and everything, but they're like, "Well, what do we do with it?" And the general consensus was they were just gonna pitch it in the dumpster.
Oh, gosh.
And I am so thankful, I don't know why I had the hindsight as a young kid, I grabbed it and was like, nope, I'm keeping it. So I was able to save quite a bit of department history. There's a lot of pictures of old members in here. There's a lot of things in here that I'm sure the vast majority of people have never seen.
That'll be cool to look for.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I've just tried my best to just kind of hang on to that history and keep it alive. That way people know sort of what happened, why it doesn't exist anymore. But yeah,
Evan,
that's,
where are we at today, with the fire department?
so coverage right now is provided by Pike Creek Township. So I guess what you could say, the station up on 28 and 700 West up there where Red Corner School was, it's the same department. It's just shared members, apparatus, equipment, everything goes to both stations. So they were awarded the contract by the town, and then they ended up moving into the station up on the hill, and they, supplied, they furnished apparatus and members and everything to provide that protection.
How are we doing staffing wise? Is it still volunteer or?
Yes, still volunteer.
Okay.
I'm
How
not
many people?
I'm not sure, because I'm not a member of Pike Creek, honestly.
Evan, can you move a little bit that way so you can be on,
Yes.
so you'll be on the screen a little
Yeah.
bit more? Right there, they're good.
So I'm actually not sure about membership at the moment. I know they're doing okay, but the biggest issue, volunteer departments are facing it across the country is just membership. People want to be involved, and just when it comes down to it, just getting a truck out the door with people on it is extremely hard in this day and age for some reason. So what has happened to a lot of local departments, and we're anticipating it happening going further, is they're forming fire territories. It's kind of the new thing where they're doing a combination of staff and volunteer. They'll do partial staffing where they'll staff so many people at a station per day that can immediately get on the truck and get it out the door. And then there will still be volunteers that can come in, whenever they're available and help out. But that's kind of the direction things are going.
I'm hearing a lot about that.
Yeah, so Richland Township and Chesterfield Union Township, they combined. They are now East Madison Fire Territory. And then Pendleton and Ingalls have combined to be South Madison Fire Territory. So it's looking like, at this point, nothing's for certain, nothing's set in stone, but it just kind of looks like things are going to continue to trend that way, where the smaller departments, the townships, are kind of going to get absorbed into fire territories. That will provide them funding, staffing, that sort of thing.
Now, you talked about in the past having 20-some odd people with fire department, a lot of them being younger people. And we're getting to that point now in this country to where we are needing to turn towards folks your age, my son's age. We need you guys, and we need even more younger people.
Yeah.
And are you thinking about going into the schools and trying to get the schools to say, hey, we want to do a volunteer thing with the fire department during the summer?
So it's actually interesting you bring that up. So here recently, in the past, I think it's been 3 years ago, Heinz Career Center in Oakland, where I actually went to vocational school. At the time I went for machine trades. I've worked in machine shops and tool and die. They actually started a fire rescue program, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
And they have a fantastic turnout. They have a lot of students that are eager to learn about fire service and becoming EMTs, paramedics, that sort of thing. They've kind of generated a lot of interest in the school system thanks to that program, and it's available to I believe Heinz services 6 high schools locally. So all the students are able to go there for a half day and experience that. And they'll get the real world training. They get practice with real equipment. They actually were donated a fire truck by Lafayette Township to use for training scenarios and to kind of practice and get an idea for, how the real world is going to feel, which is very important because training is hands down the biggest fundamental thing you can do with a fire department. And my dad was very big on stressing that because you can go pretty far with schooling and everything, and it is important, but it all boils down to just really getting hands-on experience like those kids are, which I think is great. And honestly, if it had been offered at the time when I was in high school, I probably would have gone through it just to really experience it. So.
Evan, you said that the history of the Frankton Fire Department may kind of go away. But for everybody in here that remembers it, it lives on in our hearts and in your heart, and all those maybe your age that remember. But I'd like to think too, with what you have here and the Frankton History Club, we can keep that alive for future generations.
Yeah, absolutely.
In preserving the artifacts and so forth that especially you have collected.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can put some of it into the depot
Yes, that's.
someday.
I just thought of that today. It'd be awesome to have. I'd love to help curate a small section about the fire department. I'd be more than happy to donate things and help out with that because that would mean a lot to me to have it preserved in the depot when the time comes.
Also, anybody sitting in here, any of you in the past ever had need for the fire department?
Yeah.
Well, Russell and I did. Russell, you can say,
Did.
New Year's Day,
yeah.
1980.
Yeah, but I mean specifically.
Huh?
On,
New Year's Day, 1980.
yeah, on New Year's Day, 1980, 4 o'clock in the morning, we'd had company in, with Russell's parents and so forth, for New Year's Eve. And, let's see, Russell was in our room that had the fireplace, and he heard a popping and a snapping. And we had a louvered door that was a closet, and when he opened it up, it just went whoosh. And so